Welcome one, welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe that films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, in every time period, and we're on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. And even a man who is pure of heart and says his prayers by night can become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
What are you talking about?
We're doing werewolves, right? We're doing werewolves?
No.
It's
No.
Halloween. It's Halloween.
You keep wanting to do werewolves, and I keep telling you I haven't seen The Wolfman. And then you give me shit for it. And then we settled on humans hunting humans for our second Halloween episode.
Right, humans hunting humans. Fine. It doesn't feel very Halloween-y, honestly. But you know what? At least the movies are good.
Well, I gotta say, depending on what you mean by Halloween-y, like I was definitely terrified with one of the two movies we're looking at today.
That is true. I mean, maybe it's a little too scary for Halloween, frankly.
It's not set at Halloween. It doesn't involve any of the traditional like masks or. I mean, honestly, I'd prefer the safety of like Michael Myers is hunting me than I would to the state.
Right. And that's actually sort of our theme here, because we're looking at specifically at Turkey Shoot from 1982 and Punishment Park from 1971.
Indeed. As kind of an update from our most recent one, our last Halloween episode that we kicked off with, we were looking at the horrors of LSD horror and how that kind of rippled through the culture via couple different movies. I did have an update because we found a Lockheed Martin quote-unquote educational film about LSD. I couldn't find a Lockheed Martin educational film about humans hunting humans. But I feel like maybe the news kind of covers that from a Lockheed Martin perspective.
Right. I mean, that is their business.
It's their business model. So maybe they don't want to look too closely in the mirror. But yeah, it felt like something maybe they should take a look at, or maybe just stop doing. But
well, it's not really something they want to prevent.
Right. They, would be out of business then. But I did have a question. I wanted to, as I was editing the last episode and putting it together, we had kind of commented on how there was like a die off or fade out, as we said in the episode, like in the propaganda, the media, how the media was covering the moment as we went into the 80s. And we were talking about, left-wing movements and organizing in general. I think you kind of specifically said the way that your parents experienced it versus how like our generation have experienced it. And I was kind of wondering if the reason we haven't seen the die-off kind of the way that you were generally saying your parents had experienced it, because we've sort of referenced real briefly the anti-globalization organizing efforts of the late 90s. And so then as I was editing that episode, I was like, I wonder if, because like post-90s going into the 2000s, the new millennium here, I wonder if because we have such a diversity of crises, climate, labor, police, gun violence, health, take your pick, right? And we also have the modern means of communication. Do you think maybe we're not experiencing the die-off because there's just so many crises, but then also how kind of quickly we could feel connected to groups that are actively trying to better the world or at least resisting thanks to the internet now?
It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, let me just give you an example.
Sure.
So I'm sitting here by some books, and one of them is a new sort of Marxist feminist, specifically like communist feminist tract called "Abolish the Family: A Manifesto for Care and Liberation" by Sophie Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
And then I open up, I think it's, what is it, Harper's, one of these, and there's somebody named Sophie Lewis who sounds a lot. So I haven't checked if it's the same person, writing a piece on her and her friend's love of Marilyn Monroe, who's clearly a feminist writer. And I'm pretty sure it's the same person. And here they are, an open, somebody who identifies as a communist in like a perfectly mainstream magazine.
Okay.
And I don't know if that was, I don't think that was possible in the 60s. I mean, I think you could, you could see like Noam Chomsky on a talk show. Oh, well, no, not, a little bit.
Yeah.
But and certainly there were radical people who did get into things to a certain degree. But I think it's the emergence of radicalism far enough away in the U.S. This is purely U.S. context.
Right.
Far enough away from the Cold War, and and situated among. I mean, if I look at like the labor reporting coming out of, let's say, the Washington Post or something like that. I follow one of their labor reporters. This person very likely, I don't know, honestly, I don't know, could very well identify as a socialist post like BLM and Occupy
Sure.
and Bernie and everything. So I honestly think, I mean, in some ways it's both. It could be more radical. It could be a lot of things, but I think it's just that it's infiltrated a lot of sort of the liberal mainstream, at least in a weird way, that I don't know if there's a history in the U.S. of happening, but probably would be normal in other countries,
Right, right.
which had large electoral lefts. I think part of it is having something of an electoral left mainstreams you in a particular way, and that didn't happen in the 60s.
Here, you're saying. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense actually.
In the 60s, yeah, in the 60s here, but was normal
Yeah,
everywhere else you have elections.
right. If not, even just like a diversity of parties. We have a two-party stranglehold here that like you're not really forced to work with anybody else. You can just be like, no, this is mine. Fuck everybody else. If not,
Right.
all right, let's go hunt the others.
Right. Yeah, and so, well, and part of it is like what we've had is sort of self-identified socialists infiltrating this stuff through the Democratic Party,
Mhm.
because there literally is no way through the way our
Otherwise,
electoral structure works, and whatever thinks anybody thinks of those particular projects, or whether it's the right strategy or the wrong strategy or whatever. I think I think it's really created a certain degree of cover for radical left stuff to just bubble up in a way that just wouldn't be normal. And then the other thing that's happened in the last 10 years is neoliberal capitalism isn't dead, but it's on life support. It's really not functioning normally anymore. Right now with inflation, some of the macroeconomic stuff is coming back into its own because it's really its home ground. Like the
Mhm.
crisis of the 70s and inflation is sort of where the space that neoliberalism had to grow, it sort of was birthed from, in a sense. I mean, it existed before as a set of ideas and so forth, but I think, that gives it a little bit of a fill up, because there are other answers for dealing with inflation, even within a capitalist system, that are not based on sort of monetary policy, basically class war by the central bank. But
Mhm.
nonetheless, that gives it a little more space, but it's really not like, so for instance, like, I mean, I've said this is like, here's Joe Biden, who's one of the architects of our awful times and is, really a centrist ghoul. And his opening, I mean, it hasn't ended up this way, but his opening like program was some real social democratic stuff. It was not a neoliberal program. It's
Right.
ended up that way, but not a normal one, not one you ever would have imagined 10 years ago. It would have been impossible even to do what they're doing now. Industrial policy is crazy. It's nothing really a leftist would necessarily want, but it says something like it we live in a totally different political time. And one of the things, when I was watching Punishment Park and I was reading some of the reviews, like the letterbox reviews especially, people were like, this is just like when we live now. And it's true, we live in a police state, and that's a big center of things. But we actually don't live in this moment that's being portrayed here. It could end up that way, but in a very different way than the Nixonian moment. Because in the Nixonian moment, they could make an honest argument to being a majority. And it was probably the truth to a certain degree, or if it wasn't, it was pretty close. And certainly you can say things are 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans, but I think the hard fascist core is 30%. And I think is not a majoritarian coalition in the way that what became the dominance of the new right, and then Reagan could. Like Reagan got 60% of the electorate, like 60%, which is basically no American president ever get. I mean, in our lifetime, there may not be another one who does that, but basically Reagan did it. I think Eisenhower did it. LBJ did it. I'm pretty sure FDR did it. Like 60% used to be something you could swing, and that's just not going to happen now.
No.
So I don't know. We live in a very different political moment, and I think that creates some space for just some mainstreaming of the left. It's not too late for a Red Scare. And I think we've certainly, I mean, certainly we get a lot of fight back from the liberal establishment against sort of the electoral left, which they recognize, and the rest of the left that they don't necessarily recognize. But yeah, no, it's weird. Sorry, that was a long thing there, wasn't it?
No, that makes sense though, because well, I mean, also, I mean, you're very much like literally a student of history too. And I feel like I do tend to fall into this mental trap of, I, I guess like anachronistic thinking where like I'm trying to see like patterns that humans have already went through or experienced in history, even if it's more modern, like recent history, and try to use that to help make sense of the current moment. And I think
And a
that's
lot of, yeah.
probably also evident, like you mentioned, and I think I read some of the same reviews because it sounded like what you were referencing with Punishment Park. And people like, oh my god, it feels like today. And I may have even mentioned that in my notes here because shades of it do feel very familiar.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But I think that's also
Absolutely.
because you're touching on. I think that's when art touches on potentially universal themes, using that in a very broad sense, that make you feel connected to a story the way, like, speaking of Red Scare, like you could go watch a play or film version or read the Crucible and feel like there's some parallels to modern times when really it was written as a response to the Red Scare. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
good art kind of like transcends time like that because it's commenting on some, I don't know, some of the worst instincts within our society at times.
Yeah. I mean, and as many of the people, well, as many of the victims in this movie point out, deeply embedded in its history, right? So I think, part of it is you're not wrong necessarily to have that instinct. And certainly that is a way of using history if you use it carefully. But I think one of the roles of historians is to do that. But the other
Hmm.
one is to tell people not to do that, right? Is to remind people there's the instinct is always to look to the past.
Right.
And actually, a lot of times it's to point out, no, this is actually novel, or at least novel here, right? Like that
Right.
actually that instinct to like, oh well, there's a comfort in the repetition. And one of the things about studying history is that we're not repeating ever.
Right. But you seek that comfort when you're maybe like times that feel chaotic and you're like, oh, here is a template for how it may play out. And then there's a comfort to it because you're like, okay, here's the pattern. Here's how I can make sense of this.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. Well, that's just it. It's an attempt to make sense of something, and history certainly helps you. But to a certain degree, the history is helping you by telling you how you got where you got to, as opposed to a repetition.
And also potentially like a false sense of I don't know if security is the right word, but like a false sense of like, oh, this is how it will work. You're like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
That's how it could work, or this is how it did work at that time, but also that's excluding like all these other different bits of context that you don't have around it, especially if it's an era you didn't live through or haven't really studied.
For context on Punishment Park, I said, they basically presidents don't basically historically get over 60%. Do you know who would get 60% in the next election that was a year later?
Nixon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Won every state but one, I think.
It
If you're doing the
won
electoral
every state, but I think Massachusetts.
Massachusetts was the only one. Yeah. Meanwhile, that also like the timeline for that's also crazy to me because that's like right before the full like scope of Watergate is known to the public.
Right.
So if you look at the timeline, you're like, Nixon, how did he win re-election? Watergate was this year, and then a year and a half later, he's reelected by this overwhelming majority. You're like, well, yeah, it took a while for that whole thing to come to light.
And it worked, which now it doesn't.
What do you mean?
I mean, in the sense, so right now we're dealing with this Trumpian moment where a scandal like that wouldn't even be close enough to dislodge.
Oh, right, right. I was like, there's plenty. There's like worse than Watergate. There was an attempted coup. Like,
Right. There's an attempted coup.
we're
Like
taking
we're
a
so
speculation
far.
that it doesn't matter, and everyone's like, I'm still going to vote because it's got an R next to it. So who cares? Like,
I mean, part of it is this is the sort of thing where people at that time were saying this is fascism. And they're wrong. It's not fascism. What you're seeing, part of it is that you're just seeing sort of blunt authoritarianism
mm-hmm.
in Punishment Park. We should talk about what this movie is before we start talking about it.
I think the topic here is self-explanatory. I think humans hunting humans. We were inspired by the Most Dangerous Game, great example of pre-code cinema. Nice, tight, like 62, 63 minutes long. you're shipwrecked on an island, and the count that lives there hunts people who crash there, also because it's booby trapped. But that has rippled from 1930s all the way up till that's 1932, all the way up to 2022. There is a movie coming out later this month called Run, Sweetheart, Run that I think Amazon might be putting out in theaters, but will be streaming. I think it's a Blumhouse production, but it's about a young woman who arrives at some rich asshole's doorstep. And his whole thing is, I'm going to hunt you tonight. And if you survive, then you get to live. But he's also hunting her around what looks like, I want to say, like modern LA. So it's kind of interesting that we're seeing that, from the 1930s all the way to the 2020s, this idea still grabs the imagination. Variation on setting and who is doing the hunting and who is the hunted obviously can have some interesting social and political ramifications as well.
My favorite version of this is Hard Target, personally.
My personal favorite is The Pest because I love John Leguizamo.
Oh,
I'm just
I've
kidding.
never seen that.
But
Oh, okay.
but that's what always comes to mind because I remember watching that movie because I really love John Leguizamo and it was on VHS and I was working at a video store at the time, so I popped it in and I was like, oh, this is the most dangerous game, but a comedy. Anyway, one that couldn't be farther from comedy is Punishment Park from 1971. This is from the amazing English film and television director Peter Watkins doing it's described as a pseudo documentary drama, which I figure that's fair enough.
Under the provisions of Title II of the 1950 Internal Security Act, also known as the McCarran Act, the President of the United States of America is still authorized, without further approval by Congress, to determine an event of insurrection within the United States and to declare the existence of an internal security emergency.
Restrain the defendant.
The President is then authorized to apprehend and detain each person as to whom there is reasonable ground to believe probably will engage in certain future acts of sabotage.
How many children have you killed? Who's dying right now? Do you
sent those kids out there. Nancy Smith,
I sent those kids out there. Who's dying and who's dead that was sitting right here?
Oh, you fuckers! You fuckers! You shitting fuckers!
His production style on this, so I think, is interesting just to pull in because we're obviously a political and a cinema and a film show. It's a British and also West German film crew in the context of the movie are filming or following around National Guard soldiers and police as they hunt members of the counterculture across the desert, which is part of the narrative. But I just thought that was interesting that we are dealing with a West German film crew in 1971.
Yeah. Well, it's West German and English, right?
Right.
And so I've never seen anything by Watkins before. And I'm embarrassed at this point because I feel like I'm going to spend the next however watching movies by him. It's a really, it's an incredible movie. It's an incredible piece of political cinema. And it's been on a list for so long, right?
Oh yeah.
Like it's absolutely visceral and it's, so part of it. Yeah. So this is not a dystopian future. It's just an alternate timeline, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where basically Nixon's America is getting increasingly authoritarian, and the way they're dealing with the counterculture. Well, not the counterculture. It's not actually the counterculture. It's the movement, right? I mean, the people who they're putting in here are movement people. They're anti-war activists. They're people who are very thinly veiled Black Panthers. It's and conscientious objectors. So these aren't like hippies. Really, I mean, some of them are. Some of like a couple of them, I think, probably could be, but like they're movement people, and basically, what you do is they take them to these tribunals, which are basically made up of the Nixon coalition, right? So you have, conservative, like the conservative auto worker who forgot how they got their union in the first place. You've got some local executives, you've got the conservative housewife, it's sort of the cross section of sort of the silent majority, and they basically but they're all members of the draft board, right? And their job is to run basically like a tribunal on you,
Mm-hmm.
then give you the option of whether you want to run 50 miles through
Like Death Valley,
through the
basically, right? Like
functionally, I think it's not, I don't think it's
it's not
Death Valley.
actually, but it's like it's a desert. They keep telling you the temperature as the crew is filming this, and it's like,
It's
97, 99 degrees, 102.
right. Basically, you have to run through the desert without water with the cops trying to rearrest you, but frankly, not really. And if you get to the American flag, could this be a metaphor? I don't know. If you get to the American flag, you get to go free. Otherwise, you go to jail. And you're given the option of going to jail for like whatever, 20 years or whatever your sentence is going to
Yeah.
be based on this tribunal, or doing the punishment park. And very quickly, everyone involved this is like, yeah, they're just gonna kill us, aren't they? Like, it's not. I mean, of course. And here's the thing: is you can easily die in the desert. So, like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's double-ish a marathon, and these are not like trained athletes. Also, it's the desert,
Right.
in the sun. So, it's like, but it's I guess it's supposed to be this hint of like, but you could survive this, and then you're done, or you want to serve your actual prison time.
And technically, you're not supposed to die at all. So part of what's going on, I mean, you the cops are initially saying, I mean, this is all based on formal legality. So of course the cops aren't supposed to execute you. And, and not all of them do get killed, but they do get, beaten. And spoiler, no, you don't get to win.
Right.
Sorry, I didn't even give time for a spoiler to work there. You don't get to win. So like part of it is like, it's not, it's actually a little different than a lot of human hunting human movies, or like it's a very, it's supposed to be a very realistic dystopia. So like extrajudicial murder takes the cover of, oh, they were throwing stones or whatever, like it's not, they're barely held back like at all, but they don't, technically that's not legal, right?
You mean from the cops?
Yeah, technically it's not legal, even though that's really what they're there to do.
Early on, what happens is a few of the prisoners that are on the run, they actually hide and ambush a cop and kill the cop. So they have like a revolver and maybe a shotgun. And so at
Right.
that point, the cops are clearly just like, they kill one of our own. It's death for all. They're immediately just like, the brothers in blue nonsense. Like, okay, well, they kill one of ours. Now we're going to hunt these fuckers down, and they are dead. They are dead to me.
Right.
So it gives them the excuse they need to hunt them down and kill them, which is clearly what they're interested and want to do. Because there are some like little vignette interviews that the film crew has with the cops. One, they're just fetishizing and showing off all the different guns and how awesome they are. But then also you're getting a little bit of like what some of their backgrounds are.
Right.
Well.
I mean,
and to a certain extent, some Vietnam experience as well on the part of the cops and the National Guard here.
absolutely. I mean, part of it is that the sociology, I mean, this is a profile of the sociology of America at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a real sense of the cross section of the movement from, like I said, sort of the Black Panther types, some campus organizers, conscientious objectors, sort of independent media figures, like all sorts of different people represented, and they're real people, right? Like there's no actors in this movie.
Wait. Oh, like you're not seeing like, like this is what, 1971, the movie. Yeah, like Paul Newman isn't playing one of these characters. Like,
Yeah, no,
like amateur actors, you're saying.
I don't know if they're amateurs. I think they're just got real people. I think what I mean is that, yes, they're amateur actors, but they're basically they're playing themselves. I mean, they're at the very end of the credits, like one of them apparently got arrested while the movie was happening. And I think that's not part of the movie. I think, or arrested right after the movie, like they were done making the movie. I don't think that's part of the movie. I think they're literally just one of the people got arrested.
Okay, yeah. Because
So like
it would totally pull you out of it if you had even like vague, or, lesser known character actors playing these parts. You'd be like, oh, that's the guy from I've seen from this, or that's the lady from this other movie. Like you are not going to recognize any of these folks in this movie as having been from stuff or going on to do anything else, other acting jobs in film.
Yeah, and part of what this is masterfully done intercuts, basically. Intercuts is that the right way to put it? Cutting back and forth between them on the run, the cops showing off their guns, and then the tribunals going through each of the people of a new group of people, right?
Well, let me hang on right there, because actually I wrote this down in my notes, because this was like one of my, like, this is one of the things that just blew my mind, is how this movie was put together.
Yeah, no, the structure is incredible. Just
the
go for
structure
it.
is amazing. So yes, you have the tribunal, which is going over group 638. So there's already been 637 groups that have gone through this process. And like you said, the tribunal represents like our fucked up justice system within the country. And also now this is like outside of that, even, because it's this military tribunal sort of thing. Well, it's got citizens on its board too. But anyway, you've got one group that is going through the tribunal process. And then you also have one of the other threads is the cops showing off their weaponry, how completely outgunned literally any of these groups are versus the cops versus the authorities here, the authority figures here. And then you also, what you're as 638 is going through the tribunal, that group 637 is being hunted.
Right.
So you're seeing two different groups, and so you're seeing the fate play out for this group 638, that we're actually hearing their rationales for like why they were protesting for equal justice, or like, why can't I have my own political beliefs? I thought this was a free country, like basic stuff where you're like, yeah, obviously, but not such the case with the tribunal here. So you know what their fate is going to be if they choose Punishment Park. We're watching the results of that choice play out with the previous group 637, going through Punishment Park with the authorities hunting them down.
Right. And, all of this is metaphor for America, right?
Yeah.
So part of it is, the tribunals are made up of the people who would be on the other side of the political line, and then the cops are doing what they do in real life. Basically the exact same thing that they do in real life. The way the cops are portrayed is so... I don't think I've ever seen a movie that gets it quite this right.
Yeah, that'd be tough.
I mean, they're just the language they use, the sort of semi like, oh, we're legitimate, like this is just the way it is ness of it. It's the nonchalantness of their excuses for the brutality also, but with the official legal facade.
Especially once you get to the end.
Yeah.
Of the film, especially for group when you get to the end of the group 637, when like they're like, oh my God, the American flag, it's right there. And like you said, couldn't be a stronger visual metaphor, and then are just like gunned down. And
right.
The film crew at that point actually is an interesting point too, because you have this extra narrative thread that you don't really realize is there the whole time, even though they are actually there and asking a couple questions. The film crew actually verbally confronts the cops at the end of the group 637 when they're gunned down by the American flag, saying like, what are you doing? And the cops, as you said, like, it couldn't be a more realistic portrayal. The cops' rationales for what they did, yelling back and answering some of the film crew's questions, you're just like, oh, good God. Like, you hear this on the news right now.
They killed two officers. They had it coming to them. They had a chance to stop. Did they stop? I'm asking you, did they stop?
No, that's not a reason, man. That's not a reason.
If they wouldn't arrest us if you hadn't been there trying. Oh, shit.
So happens these poor people have not hurt a goddamn fly on the entire desert.
You think we'd let them reach that flag? You've been bugging us ever since we've been here. And we're just doing our job today, and I'm telling you, it has
It's exactly that. They don't even really care about being on. They barely care about being on camera.
No, not really at all.
I mean, they get the news crew. So the news crew gets into it they're with one of the cop snipers. They're with not news crew. The crew is with one of the cop snipers, and a bunch of the escapees are like surrendering to the sniper, but they can't hear him, and they keep walking toward him, and they can't hear him. And the documentary crew or whatever is saying like, he can't hear you, and he's freaking out and starts shooting them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the cops show up and shoot the rest of them. And that's when like the crew loses it, right? Like they become less doing documentary stuff and more like, everyone will know about this. You realize this is going to be on ABC. Like, like,
and they're pretty much like, oh, I don't care. This is the law. Like, this is what we do.
Or, well, in both of these in both of the cases where they're confronting, it's, oh, there was a misunderstanding. They were throwing rocks, or, they didn't stop when we told them to stop. And the sniper genuinely makes an accident, but part of it is, or, it makes a mistake. But part of what that's portraying, and I really like this, is the diversity of their positions. It's National Guard and the cops. Some of them are planning to kill people. Some of them, it's that they're on a hair trigger.
Right.
And so it's the structural positioning of even the cops who are not, let's say, planning to be murderers because like they're out and out fascists, are positioned in such a way that that's what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of them just, that's kind of what they're here for.
Yeah, for sure. I did want to mention with this one too, this movie is 1971. So to give us a little cultural context for it as well, Kent State was the year before when you have National Guard troops gunning down and killing 4 and injuring 13 on the Kent State campus. Very, grim reality that was still in the headlines and still had reverberations going into 1971 because that happened May 1970, so like at the end of the school year. And now you have a movie where we're fictionally depicting, essentially student age people being hunted down and killed by National Guard and cops.
Right. And so a bunch of the people on Tribunal are like 30 or 26. But there's a 19-year-old in there who's a singer, who's a political singer. A lot of them, they're not pretending that they're not making violent rhetoric or whatever. I mean, the people on Tribunal, like the Tribunal, some of them, there's a cross section.
Hold on.
Like some of them are
people in front of the Tribunal.
Yeah, the people in front of the Tribunal. Some of them are for violent revolution. Some of them are pacifists. It's getting across. I mean, this is the thing about like people who understand the space of the movement roughly. I don't know if everybody in the movement at the time would say that, but who understand this cross section of the movement are making this movie. But the 19-year-old openly brings up Kent State. Like Kent State was what pushed things over for her. Why bother with this? Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm in a protest or not. They'll still shoot me.
Right.
And that's directly the effect of Kent State.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty interesting, especially like to bring up within that. But then also since there's like the Kent State reverberations, also at this point in time, you have the trial going on in Chicago. Actually, not at this time, but it has already gone on. So you have like the post-68 Democratic Convention and, everything that's going on in Chicago. And then you actually have the trial with Abby Hoffman and Seal and everybody. Like that's still reverberating through the culture. And I think Watkins was grabbing very specific. He has direct elements of that in this movie. The folks, as we mentioned, from group 638 that are in front of the Tribunal. One of the black men that are on the Tribunal is like gagged and being held in front of the Tribunal when like the verdict is being read, the same way that Seal was gagged like in real life when they were on trial in Chicago. And I actually even wrote in my notes, I was like, man, I really wish Aaron Sorkin would have watched this movie before he did his dumbass Trial of Chicago 7. I don't know, would it changed his mind at all or given him a bit better context, but I was like, just made me even angrier at that movie watching this one.
I mean, that's just it. This is when liberals make movies like that.
Wait, Chicago, the Sorkin one?
Yeah,
Sorkin
one.
Oh, God.
I mean, liberals in that sense.
Yeah.
Here's what's, I mean, it's interesting because so much of the framing of this politically, is it about the lie of America? Or is it about, does the metaphor of this movie, and so many of the people are appealing, and they may be appealing because they're before this, they're appealing to even the ones who basically want to overthrow the government are appealing to the rights that you formally get. Because part of the point is that those have been ignored, right? The rights under the Constitution.
Yeah.
Is the movie, so the sort of like liberal nationalist move, and I know that sounds very strong in relation to this movie, which is definitely not that, but the liberal nationalist move is the United States needs to live up to itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're sort of critiquing like state violence or whatever, or the entire history of the country, which people in this movie point out, the whole history of this country is violence. It was slavery and slavery and settler colonialism. And the non-one would be that just it's always been a lie, right?
Right.
Is this movie saying it's always been a lie, or is it appealing to the liberal nationalist narrative? Because some people in the movie do that.
I mean, I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think as you see the group go in front of the Tribunal, the group that we see go in front of the Tribunal here again is group 638. I think you get a variety of perspectives. When like you said there, like at one point there's like you said, like the songwriter there, like an artist that even gets this killer line later on that like there's no place for a poet in this culture anymore. And you're like, oh god damn, that hurts. But all the way through a conscientious objector, that person, that I think it was a guy, he was just like, I just want to get to fucking Canada. Like, why? I just want out of here. I'm done with this. Versus like, the one who's coming more from a militant feminist point of view, or someone that's coming from more of like a Black Power perspective and liberation ideas. You're getting kind of a diversity of what potentially the American project means to those different people. So I think you kind of get all of those mixed in, which is interesting because it really gets you thinking about that in a different way too, I think. Where like some people are expecting it like, oh, if I just remind you that I have constitutionally protected free speech, then I'm good. I'll be let go. And other people are just like, fuck this whole system, man. This has to get burned down. And it's interesting too, because different people in front of the tribunal engage with the tribunal in different ways. Like I mentioned, some people end up gagged and bound, and some are like actively trying to engage in a dialogue with the people that are on the tribunal, which is clearly a fool's errand. So you kind of, it's interesting how you get the different people's perspective, which also keeps it fresh with each new scene. How the different people are engaging, well, one engaging with just American culture in general, and then also then how they're interacting with the tribunal.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of officially the tribunals, it's a bad faith dialogue situation where technically these authoritarian right wingers are there to like, I don't know what they think they're going to get out of this other than like yelling at some kids to cut their hair and shape up. And then pick your poison, punishment park, or do you want jail?
Well, hypothetically, they might not go to either, but they're going to go to either.
Well, yeah, because the one person I wrote down even a quote, they were like, we're giving them a say and a chance to explain themselves. Because after the group 638 chooses their fate, we get the tribunal having like this potluck lunch under a tent, talking directly to the cameras about their perspectives. And you're just like, oh, you thought you were doing that in there? Okay, that's interesting and terrifying.
I think one of the things that really gets me is the little bits of the interior lives of the tribunal that you get.
The people on the tribunal?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's one of them who talks about his own kids and that one of his daughters had been misbehaving.
Oh, yeah.
Now, part of it is the people they're going after are actually, by and large, the people in this, are actually not that young. There's a 30-year-old, there's like I said, like there's people well into their 20s. They're not like actually just kids. But the way he talks about his own kids, about the sort of matter-of-factness of, well, they were misbehaving, but, we got them into line, is really chilling.
Yeah.
Is like really effectively chilling. And it gets across the generational conflict element of this. I find generational conflicts really goofy, by and large. I don't really buy into the sort of boomer narrative. It's not that generational conflicts aren't real and that there can't be these sorts of things and that wasn't part of the dynamic going on in the 60s and early 70s. Obviously, there are other dynamics. I mean, the people organizing the peace movement are actually not 19, right? Like they're in their 20s, they're in their 30s, they might be in their 50s. Like it's not purely on that basis ever, but it gets that across in a way that really captures it very nice, And to a certain degree, these are things that we could hear now, but to a certain degree, what you're hearing is the voice of a generation that's like doesn't exist anymore, functionally. Because by and large, the people on this tribunal are like the World War II generation, which is not very much of it is left. And it's their sort of, if you think about generational experiences, one of the things about sort of our generational politics right now, boomers, people realizing Gen X is actually the worst, kind of true. If you're going to operate that way, which you should not. Also that the boomer generation actually doesn't exist in the way that marketers created it, because by the mid 60s, you have a totally different experience than somebody born in 46. None of this actually works, but it's interesting. It is like a time capsule. Now, you can get this obviously from lots of things, but it's a very potent time capsule into a particular type of a reactionary politics that also doesn't exist anymore. Just as it's a window into, frankly, a type of left politics that doesn't exist anymore. And I find that interesting. I mean, it is, even though it's not a documentary, it is practically a documentary into that.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting because it has the style and immediacy that having like a documentary aesthetic will give the brain, because you're like, oh, I'm watching this for real. And then, yeah, since I'm not watching it's not 71, so like Burt Reynolds and Ernest Borgnine aren't like the cops in this one. and that would give it a very different feel. So since I'm not recognizing anybody in the cast, like we said, it does give it kind of a feeling of immediacy in the moment, but at this point now, like a time capsule of what was going on. And since it kind of it has a multiple perspectives, kind of bringing in all of these different lived experiences, it opens up the range of experiences from that time period that it's trying to portray in a fictional way, different than, say, like, I don't want to sound like I'm being mean about this at all, because I'm not, because I love it. But, a movie like Uptight, which is fully fictional, that we've covered previously on the show, or maybe something more like Ice, the film from 1970. Like it's narrowly focused in on one specific aspect of a movement, versus like this is kind of trying to get a sampler pack almost of all of these different folks that are before the tribunal.
Yeah. It's a snapshot of a moment, but in its worst outcomes, right?
Well, right, because we're not seeing these characters engaged in their acts of either civil disobedience or social justice or whatever. Like they're being punished for exercising what they thought were rights guaranteed by the Constitution and whatnot. So,
or rights that they didn't think were guaranteed by the Constitution, but now they're, you were sort of hoping it wouldn't be quite this authoritarian.
Right. I was kind of hoping it wouldn't get to this, but hey, remember this and this? Oh, it doesn't matter here. Oh, fuck it. All right, I guess. And then we should say, by the end, they all the people in group 638 choose Punishment Park, which is extra bittersweet from an audience perspective watching this, because we just saw what happened to the previous group 637, and they reached the flag and basically like, oh, the system is rigged. We're not going to actually get out of here.
Those you're still going to go to jail. Because if you don't make it to the flag, you go back to jail. But they also get beaten on top of that. Like the remainder, there's only 4 of them that make it through who live, right? And of those, you don't see them die. You just see them get beaten, I think.
I just wrote down in my notes, everybody's like, you reach death before you get to the American flag. So
yeah,
I was thinking they were all killed.
It's ambiguous. It's not clear. Because the
well, what is clear is they're not getting to the flag and being released.
They're not being released.
Yeah.
Actually, I think the reason they're not is because when the film crew is yelling at the cops, they're not saying that you killed them. You're saying that you didn't let them make it.
Well, they're yelling about the ones they were killed on camera in front of them.
They know about those ones, right? But we're talking about the four there were at the very end. The film crew is not saying that they were murdered. We just see them get beaten, and the film crew is saying you didn't let them get through.
Gotcha. I should say, as part of my viewing experience, I paused a couple times and was just pacing because I could feel my blood pressure rising on several occasions. But also, I was just like, "What the like?" It is a visceral experience to watch this one.
It's an incredible piece of filmmaking. It's a masterpiece.
Absolutely. And by the end, I was just pacing while watching like the wrap up to it, because I was just like, "Holy shit!"
So let's talk about Turkey Shoot.
So one thing I wrote down kind of in comparison that I think is an interesting way to kind of contrast these as we open up talking about Turkey Shoot is, and I've been thinking about this a lot watching different stuff going through the month of October and a lot of my, Halloween themed watching of horror movies. There is a certain amount of pleasure that comes from genre filmmaking. And I got that pleasure and a lot of enjoyment watching Turkey Shoot, and I got zero pleasure watching Punishment Park. And it's not a genre that faux documentary can give you pleasure. Faux documentary is technically what Christopher Guest has made his entire career out of, basically. Comedic documentaries about goofy subcultures, right? But it's also kind of awesome that you could take that same exact approach to telling a story and have like an emotionally shattering experience like Punishment Park.
Right. And to be clear, Punishment Park does exactly what it intends to do.
Oh, 100%. And Turkey Shoot does what it intends to do as well, in my opinion. I don't think it's quite at the same level, but it's an exploitation, in this case, an Ozploitation movie. It's an Australian production directed by Brian Trenchard Smith, who is one of the most, not frustrating. He's such a confusing filmmaker. I adore like his exploitation stuff like Dead End Drive-In or Stunt Rock. But I also, a couple weeks ago, watched Leprechaun 4 in Space, which is a Brian Trenchard Smith movie. And it's just damn near unwatchable. It's so bad. So,
I mean, I think you like this more than I do. I enjoy this movie. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it is exactly what you're saying it is.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about it comparing. So when we first decided this, I think we both seen Turkey Shoot, and neither of us had seen Punishment Park.
Right.
And these are almost like the same movie. I think we both said this.
It's on the last episode, like because the plot.
Right. It's on the last episode of saying this nearly, and they're not.
No. I mean, in description, maybe
they look like they're the same thing.
Right.
In reality, they're totally different. And one of the things about Turkey Shoot is, frankly, obviously every movie has a politics to it. That's the premise of our podcast. But this movie has no formal politics. It punched them. I mean, basically, what you're dealing with is, the plot is a fascist regime. I think it's pretty openly fascist regime has re-education camps for dissidents or any rando people who happen to get swept up by them, because the net is really wide, and we've got like a wide range of people here. And basically some powerful officials from within the regime have come and the warden basically asked the warden to let them hunt inmates. Is that the basic premise? Am I missing something?
So it's 1982 when the movie was produced, and I think even the prologue says something about like a Holocaust has happened or whatever. I don't know if this was like a nuke scare kind of thing, because they're not talking about it as like a nuclear hellscape or anything like that. But yeah, it's I got a quote from Brian Trenchard Smith. He talks about it being 1984 meets The Camp on Blood Island, which is an old like Hammer horror film, where they play the most dangerous game.
It is 1995.
Open season!
Hunting is the national sport, and people are the prey. The world is ruled by a strict regime.
They're going to make obedient little citizens out of us.
Who are?
Society.
What do you mean?
Step out of line, and they take you to the funny farm. You could die laughing.
All you have to do is lead my guests on a chase for one day. A little sport.
You're going to kill us?
Not necessarily. You might survive.
Is everybody ready?
Come on, you big piece of shit.
You come to me.
I'm the one you can't break. I'm what you've been afraid of all your life.
I'm afraid of nothing.
You're afraid of failing.
And now, my little flower. Yes, I'm going to taste your honey.
It is less the size of one's gun that counts, or the skill with which it's used.
Don't you kill him, Jennifer. He's my target. This is Thatcher. The hunt is over. Shoot on sight, shoot to kill.
But then I think folks would also find this interesting in the era of, speaking of humans hunting humans, the era like Squid Game came out, huge sensation on Netflix, very interesting South Korean television production. You have something similar in this one where like the rich and wealthy can come in and pay a fee and they get to hunt people that are part of the prison camp. And in one of my favorite, if you want, spoiler free going into Turkey Shoot, great kind of fun exploitation movie with hitting all of those buttons that you'd expect from an action exploitation film to have. Go ahead and watch the movie before you listen to the rest of the conversation. But one of the things that really grabbed me in this movie was the what the fuck moment that happened to me. And I think I wrote down about the 45-minute mark where one of the hunters arrives to do his hunting of people, and he brings with him a werewolf.
So yes, so this is when the movie really, I think, kicks into high gear, frankly. The hunting them isn't normal. Like the people coming in here are basically framed as very powerful people within the regime, right? I mean, this is the warden's going to be able to move up with this. One of them is a minister, and then we'll get into the stereotypes at play with the other two. But one of the other two, basically what they are, they're sort of the gay Nazi trope, which I'm going to be honest, I don't totally know where that comes from, and I hope somebody can point it out. I probably Need to do some research on it, or should have before the show. Sorry. It's not great, right? Like I would consider it a sort of a homophobic trope. I mean, these are basically two very queer coded characters, except that instead of having sex, they torture people.
Right. I don't know if it's because it's a female character too. I don't know if this goes back to like Ilsa and those exploitation films or how that works, but
it might. I mean, it's somewhere deep in the culture and also to a certain degree potentially reality. But I mean, both of them. Yeah, I mean, there's two of them. So one of them has a random werewolf. So you know what? I take it back at the beginning of the episode.
Oh, we did have werewolf in here.
This is a werewolf episode. God damn it!
Just not the one you were hoping for.
Yeah, and when that happens, when the werewolf comes out, you're like, God damn! All right, this movie's awesome because this makes no sense.
No,
this has nothing to do with anything. You just want a wolf man in here to fuck with people.
And no one is like, wait, what the hell is this? They're just like, oh, okay, that's your weapon of choice. Okay,
right, that's your weapon of choice. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I should say. I mean, I look at my notes. It's a yearly thing where Thatcher, he has a circle of VIPs, which includes a secretary, and a few other folks. But yeah, so like this is a thing. They do a 12-hour hunt. The people get a 3-hour head start, and they choose people from the camp to be hunted.
Right. You know, I mean, this is the thing: is it's good, cheesy fun. Like I was saying, like politics wise, there isn't any formal politics. Like you basically, I feel like you have a pretty like. I don't know what this movie's making a comment on. I'm not sure it is making a comment on. I think it's just that the 70s are full of dystopian movies, and this is an early 80s movie. I mean, there's the general fascism of it, right? Like there's the general oppressiveness of it, but I don't know if they're speaking to a particular thing in the movie.
That's true, because also keep in mind too, we were talking about it at the top of the show specifically from like a United States point of view. This is an Australian production, too.
Right?
And I'm not well versed at all in Australian politics, specifically of like the 80s as well. But like you said, it's more like, okay, what are like hot button sci-fi, or what are financially successful sci-fi movies going into the early 80s? And you have the likes of like maybe either you're going to go like a Planet of the Apes style. Granted, there's a Wolfman. That's not an ape thing here, but or you can go maybe like a Soylent Green kind of vibe. Like it's this, yeah, like the way it was specifically the Nixon administration being, the totalitarian government in Punishment Park. This one is more just like, oh yeah, it's an oppressive totalitarian regime in the near future.
Right. Exactly.
With like vague allusions to maybe, like you said, like SS or Nazis the way the uniforms are, but not entirely.
Right.
Like the prison camp guards, it's more just like, oppressive government's evil. Like, okay, yeah, sure.
I mean, indeed. Yeah, I mean, part of it is that those are the trends of the 70s in terms of this stuff, and they're the trends of the 80s because Mad Max had happened, right? But, very different type of post-apocalyptic. But like post-apocalyptic nuclear conflicts goes in the 80s because, Reagan's happened, so we think we're all going to die. It's not like the most happening sci-fi thing that you could rip off because that would be ripping off Star Wars at that point. But, it's cool.
Well, it's within like a dystopian fiction sci-fi, not necessarily like, space.
Right.
I would also say maybe even like A Boy and His Dog is out by this time.
Yeah, A Boy and His Dog is like mid-70s, I think.
Yeah, that's pre-Mad Max. But no, I that's more the sandbox it's playing in, is like the dystopian. What if the dystopian world of Mad Max, like, but we only have it set in a prison camp, and then they're hunted, and then it just gets
on Tropical Island, and then it gets napalm. Then you successfully kill your hunting party, lead a open rebellion in a pretty actually impressive battle sequence. Then the camp gets napalmed, and then revolution, I guess.
Yeah, but the revolution in the same sense as like Happily Ever After is, it's a satisfying feeling as like the last part of the movie, but you're like, yeah, but to what? Because there's been no overt politics here. Because even the lady who survives was a shopkeeper who was just swept up and was accused of being a rebel, versus like the main guy, Paul, is like a political dissident. He's already escaped other camps. He wants to break the warden the way the warden wants to break him.
You mean Steve Railsback?
Steve Railsback, yeah. So like, yeah, like there isn't clear cut politics. It's more just like, I want you dead as much as you want me dead, almost. Sort of like,
yeah. I mean,
Paul's idea there.
Yeah. What is his? I'm trying to remember like really what his. I mean, he's like radio broadcaster, secret radio broadcaster type.
Yeah,
but he's also got
bunker trying to get the truth out. Like, well, that's more like even in the Terminator series. you've got like younger John Connor like broadcasting about the resistance and like, can we pick up a signal and like communicate in order to take down this regime kind of thing. But again, with no real specific politics other than totalitarianism bad, human freedom good, which I'm not against. There's really nothing more than that. It's just there to get you into the action and to create clear lines of bad guys and good guys.
Right.
Or protagonists, antagonists, however you want to word that. But
I mean, I enjoy the sheer campiness of hands being cut off, and you can clearly see the sleeve, that the person's sleeve is filled.
Oh, right.
Like,
Yeah.
their
The
hand is
arms
in
are
their sleeve.
extended once the hands are gone because you have to put
It's
the
just like
caps on.
like you had enough money for the camp, but like we're just out of it with the hands. So just, do the best you can.
We get Alf, ALPH, the Wolfman, eating a toe, I believe, at one point.
Yeah, he does eat a toe.
Bites a toe off somebody. We do get what is it? Is she the secretary of the party? There's a female character who wants out another female character and clearly has an off-screen orgasm by poking her full of arrows until the victim is dead. That seemed like it maybe has some of that Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS kind of vibes.
Oh, totally. I mean, that's part of what's going on there.
I mean, amongst other subtext that
it's, yeah. Well, I don't feel unqualified. I honestly, we're back in grad school time. I'm sorry to your listeners. I do try to do some research before episodes, but I didn't get a chance to work through the trope. And it's not an uncommon one, and I'm sure one of you actually knows where this comes from.
Well, she hunts with a crossbow, which also just a good visual because everybody else is like hunting with guns or hunting with their pet werewolf as their weapon.
I mean, it speaks to the sadism because she doesn't have. I mean, obviously you don't have to kill with a gun either,
right?
But it makes it easier for her to torture them.
But also the way she's like carefully loading the crossbow, like it couldn't be more like phallic, play, and then
that's true. God,
weapon
right?
Choice, and yeah, it's interesting. But again, I don't know. Maybe it's not saying as much the same way where like there are politics here, but like on a very basic level, just to have dividing lines of good and bad. Maybe it's not as deep as we're thinking. Maybe it is just like some easy torture porn, woman on woman torture porn.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is part of what's going on, right? I mean, that's part. This is a exploitation movie. This is part of your, titillation. I think it's, I think it's pretty well acted. I think it's a lot of. I think it's a lot of fun. It's an interesting entry in this. It's an interesting splicing of this particular genre. Of its different genre ingredients, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty goofy.
Yeah, but it hits the beats I expect from an exploitation film.
Yeah,
or
no, you're right.
An exploitation film. So like, there's some camp to it. There's some goofiness to it. There's what looks like maybe a larger metaphor for society and what's going on. It has some action to it. I guess there's some like titillation to it, or like a certain sexuality. Maybe not as much in this one, which thankfully
there's attempted sexual violence, and there's boobs.
Like I was trying to think like within the genre. You expect maybe like a little more like more eroticism than titillation sometimes. I don't know, but there's some sexual stuff going on too. But no, it hits a bunch of those beats. I did find I got some quotes for you from film critics of the time who disagree with us entirely. One called it a vomitous offering, which is a great way to describe a film.
Yeah.
The Akron Beacon Journal, kind of local-ish to us, a little south of Cleveland here, they called it garbage and highlighted the excessive use of gore and called the acting very wooden. Which I don't agree with. I mean, it's doing what it's doing. This isn't like no one's using the method here to like really get into the psyche of Paul Anders, the political dissident, or anything.
I mean, part of it is you're grading on a curve in a movie like this. This is not about. They're wooden, but they're fine. They're fine. They're doing what they do. I'm sure nobody's paycheck is enough to like go in for Shakespeare here. I think it's, all right, I want to pull something political out of this, right? So obviously, but it's the most asinine politicalness of it. I mean, well, okay, I already did because we've got certain tropes, which are frankly problematic TM, but like actually like not great. To a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
But and that, in some ways the sheer politicalness of it, except that, the popularity of the post-apocalyptic genre, it has a lot of strength in the well, not post-apocalyptic. You have apocalyptic basically in the 50s because of nuclear war. In the 70s, you still have nuclear war, but it's over environmental stuff. It's all over. It's about other various things. Certainly, authoritarian regimes are assumed in a lot of those movies, but don't have to be. But nuclear war is there. And in the 80s, you can kind of combine both, frankly, pretty effectively in the sort of Reagan Thatcher era. So like in that sense, it's reflective of the broader cultural subconscious anxiety, right? About, frankly, the fact, apocalyptic fears are, ancient and show up in many religions, and there's good reasons why they do, because if you've lived through plagues and famines and so forth, the world is ending. But I do think it takes on a very different quality when literally it's humans themselves doing it, right? And that's I'm sure somebody can point out, that's something that could come maybe with World War I or to some degree World War II, but nuclear weapons and environmental destruction as something that's really there and really very possible creates a different type of genre environment and a different way that people are dealing with this. And this movie is part of that, goofy werewolf and all.
Right. Which, to speak directly to that from a filmmaking perspective, I really got strong Roger Corman mixed with John Carpenter vibes in this one. For a lot of what you were just saying there, like you take maybe like a kernel of an idea or something that may be a kernel of like, very political idea, and then you kind of run with it through an exploitation or an action lens.
Yeah.
To varying degrees of success here and there.
To varying degrees of success. Yeah. None of this is John Carpenter.
No, but I feel like it's got a level of craft to it, which I think is probably, where Trenchard Smith kind of excels at. There's a level of craft to it that you don't necessarily get with other. I've seen far worse and far more offensive, like Ozploitation, but also exploitation films in general.
I think, all right. So that is a good point. It's about a basic level of craft. This is the thing. This is a 3-star for me, which means it's a good movie. And I think really what that is that like they're actually, that basic level is there. There's enough budget and there's somebody who knows how to shoot.
Yeah.
And like it's there.
Yeah. And I went a little bit higher. I went with 4 stars because it's got a Wolfman in it. So extra star for my jaw being on the floor when that popped up. I guess there's also possibly like a political reading of like, because once Paul has been successful in like kind of escaping the turkey shoot itself, he returns to camp and he unlocks the gun cabinets and then he arms all the other prisoners. There's kind of like a, using the master's tools to free the people kind of thing going on, because they shoot up the camp and they turn the turkey shoot on the people running the camp, so that as they're shooting up and killing people in the camp and then heading to the hills, there's already been a call put out to the Royal Air Force or whatever that is in Australia. And then they come through and then just napalm the camp, which is actually full of the guards who have come back in to try to reassert control on the prisoners, who are now at a safe distance from the explosions. So what is the real turkey shoot here?
What is, goddamn, you've changed this entire movie for me. What is the real turkey shoot?
Yeah.
The turkey shoot is for the fascists themselves.
Taking them down.
Oh yeah.
With their own weapons. So
and you know what? That in itself is you're right. That in itself is a political point worth making.
There we go. So yeah, if you want some like genre pleasures, I guess maybe pleasures is the wrong word, but that's the way I was kind of thinking of it. Then, click play on Turkey Shoot. Very interesting, fairly traditional, again, continuation of The Most Dangerous Game, with a little Australian exploitation spin on it this particular Halloween season. Again, though, not specifically that it's a Halloween movie, but like it's got plenty of gore if that's what you're going for. And a lot of the thrills and things that go along with exploitation cinema. If you want to be truly terrified this Halloween season, hit play on Punishment Park. I watched it on YouTube, actually. Or if you can get yourself a copy of it, obviously get a copy of it.
Yeah, you should get a copy of it, but there is a beautiful version on YouTube.
It really did.
Yeah, no, this is, God, I think Punishment Park is one of the best movies we've done in a while.
It's definitely one of the best movies I've watched this year, and I don't do it just on films I've seen in 2022. Punishment Park is near the top.
Yeah, no, it's really high up there.
But But I have high hopes for our next few episodes as well, to get some top of the list for 2022 watches.
You know why? You know what next month is?
It's Werewolf Month.
No, I'm sorry. That moment has passed. Next year, Halloween will all be about werewolves. A whole month of werewolves. We've talked about this before. It's hard to find good werewolf movies.
You talked about this before.
All right. I've talked about this before, and I've talked about good werewolf movies, but it's
no, I trust you.
It's time, and not only it's time to work through every single teen puberty allegory in every werewolf movie that Anyway, all right. There. Can you imagine doing a double episode on Ginger Snaps and Teen Wolf?
I mean, flash cut to October 2023, and we're recording. So yes, I can
imagine. That would be.
I can imagine.
In a certain sense, that's as much contrast as these two movies. Where on the surface, you're like, hey,
oh, it's the same story.
It's puberty and werewolfism, and then you're like, yeah, but no, not really. But next month is Noirvember. I think this is the real sweet spot for movie people, right? Because you get horror movie month first, and then you get noir month next.
That's true.
What kind of noir do we want to do this month? Or at least for the next episode?
Right. We are going to take a look at a long-promised subgenre of noir that we've talked about. We've covered it slightly, but we're going to do a little bit more coverage with Japanese noir this November. Maybe have an extra little Halloween treat in there as well. If keep an eye on the feed.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, we're going to be jumping into Japanese film noir in November.
Oh yeah. Really excited for this. Frankly, some of the best noir out there.
Including a few titles that I will try to get this metaphor right, have been burning a hole in my queue because I've been sitting there for a little while, and I was like, "Ooh, I really need the right push to hit play on a few of these." And doing it for the show is exactly what I needed, I think.
Yeah, there's a bunch that I obviously need to watch, and there's a bunch that I desperately have wanted to rewatch and just need a reason, right? Like I just need to do it. I'm talking about you, Cold as My Passport.
Have a reason here in a couple of weeks. Yep. But before we do fully sign off, be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. And if you enjoy the show, tell a friend or two. We are also up and running social media stuff, so just check the show notes for active links to go to all of those. And until next time, I am Aaron.
And I am Isaac. And, stay safe out there because, here's the thing. It is the time of ghouls and ghosts and witches and various other things that go bump in the night. It's a little scary out there, right? When you're walking home at night and you hear some footsteps behind you and it might be, something a little wicked that's coming this way, run for it. That's all I can say. Actually, or maybe don't, because are you more likely to make it if you run for it or if you walk quickly or if you stand still? What horror movie trope? I think, I think you're pretty screwed either way.